Hello, writers, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today's episode, Reading, the Writing My Novel Progress Reports number 22. My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything at Writing for Screens, a channel that I have tried to develop in order to take some of the skills and tools and insights that I had to teach myself in a 25-year career writing for TV and movies. On my way out of the business, I am trying to leave behind some of that stuff I had to work out for myself in case it is of use to you as you work out stuff for yourself, because you're going to have to figure out whether it works for you or not. I can't tell you. There are no rules. There is no right or wrong way to be creative. Therefore, you need to check out what different people say, test them against your reality, and come up with your path for your art. That is what every artist must do. Every artist must make their own path. All I can do is offer you a bunch of things I figured out for myself for you to try. The way I've done this is this is a little screenshot of the main page of my channel. And if you look down, scroll down a bit, you'll see that there's a bunch of playlists. The first 3 playlists, here they are Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. These 3 playlists have about 50 10-minute videos. Each one of those 10-minute videos is crafted to just give you some thoughts on a specific topic. Genre, flashbacks, dialogue, writing in scenes, working on outlines. Each one, the title says what it's about, and in case that's not easy enough for you, I also made it the thumbnail. Great big colorful letters that say what it's about. So all you need to do is scroll down and read those thumbnails, pick out some stuff. I urge you, I beg you, I implore you to watch these. They are there 24/7 for free, and each one of them has a large number of small practical things for you to examine for yourself. See if it works for you. See if it doesn't. That is the whole thing. That is all that anyone can give you. So when that was done, I then did live streams, of which this is one. The live streams run like an hour. They are entirely different. I beg you, first try to watch those little videos, the little lessons. However, every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time Zone, if I can make it, next couple of weeks or the holidays, I will not. I take on a different topic. Today's topic, as I said, is about reading your own novel as you work on it. And that is what I'm going to discuss because that's what I've been doing. But first, some quick hellos. Hello, Sonia and TT and Haska, who is still not the pirate. Hello, Michael and Donna and Doreen. Okay, hello everybody. Good to see you. Let's talk about what I've been doing the past few weeks on the novel I am writing. So the point here is reading, by which I mean, obviously, it's always good to be reading other things, but I mean actually reading through your own work, which I finally did. I have been writing this, well, I started it in the 90s, so I've been writing it a long time. But the past year, I've been really trying to work on the text. The text is now about 400 pages of rough draft, which is way longer. It's like 100 pages too long, but that's okay. But the main thing is it's still very much a work in progress, very much a rough draft, a mess. Honest to God, certain sequences are starting to come into focus, but a lot of them are just a mess. So the question is, can you read that? And is it a good idea to read that? So what I found is it is incredibly important now and then, no matter what phase you're at, the worst, roughest, garbagiest mess of a phase, to stop and see if you can read it as an audience, as a reader. That is really hard for me. I had the hard thing for me is to find a way to not work as I read, but to actually read like a reader. not like, oh, I'm working on this, I'm in the midst of it. What I had to do was I had to export the entire document as a PDF, which isn't that different from reading it on the screen, because I didn't print it, but somehow transforming it into a PDF, which you can't change, where I just was reading it, scrolling down the pages, helped me to see it in a different way. I find it really, really hard to read my own work while I'm doing it. And I do not mean this the usual way that people mean it's hard to read their own work because they're seeing all the flaws, they're seeing how it's bad, they feel bad about it. That's actually not the case at all. I mean, I do see all the flaws and I do think it's bad, but I'm just always working on it. I'm always thinking, oh, well, I can fix this, and oh, that's supposed to be that, and oh, there. And I'm not actually experiencing it. I'm not actually reading it. I'm working on it, and they're different. So by exporting it to a PDF, I'm going to do another bunch of hellos. Hello, Pelicans. Hello, Arturus. I don't know the number of words. I will try and find out. But I don't tend to think in terms of number of words. The software keeps track, but I don't look at that. I'm learning that, in fact, number of words is how people estimate these things. I always think pages. But of course, pages change depending on how you format it. For instance, I have this set at not double spaced, but 1.5 spaced. Double spaced is too far from my eye to enjoyably read. Single spaced is too close. But the answer is, therefore, my 400 pages are 400 line and a half pages. Anyway, the point is, oh, and Donna is saying, yes, thank you. Messy is something, thank you very much. So what did I get from reading through my 400 pages? And this took me like a week because I could only read so much at a time. I tried to do 50 pages a day, but sometimes I couldn't. And the question, the first thing I wanted to say was, I really want to emphasize how much you do not know what your work is, what it's about, how it works, until you have written something down and read it. When you read it is when you begin to understand it, even though you know it, even though you've planned. Like for me, you guys have seen, I outline to death. I have outlined this over and over for well over a year. And then every time I do another pass, I then go back and I analyze more. I have thought out every single scene. And yet, when I read it, I found things that I had not seen yet, that I had not understood as how it works. And I want to talk about that. I'm going to just briefly answer. Arturus was saying, have I targeted a number? Not a number. The rough feeling is I would like it to be under 300 pages. I don't know how many words that is. I'll figure it out as I go along. It's going to be a feeling of like, when does it read right? When does it feel? But I don't want it to be long. I want it to move fast, and I want it to be if somebody looked at the book, they'd say, yeah, I can get into that. It's dense, it's fast moving, it's intense, so I don't need it to be long. So let me talk about what I discovered when I read it, because it was huge. It was not a minor thing. There were some tons of minor things I noticed, but I noticed a central character and the themes about that character's life that I had not fully dealt with. It's astonishing that you can overthink as much as I do and still not know things until you go along. The thing that I want to stress about this, because I really want to say this like over and over, because every single thing I have written, good, bad, and indifferent, over 50 years, I have had this same experience, which is I overthink it, I plan it, I work it to death. Then at some point I read it and I go, oh my God, now I get it. Now that does not mean I am seeing it and going, oh, I was wrong about it. It's more like I didn't see how the things I was doing can be made more what they are. that there were unexplored or unaccepted elements that when I read it, I said, it's there. I see what I can do with it now. I just didn't realize it was important. It was saying those things. And I'll talk more specifically about that. The important thing I want to stress is, and like I said, movie scripts, novels, whatever it is, if you are doing this writing thing well, and even if you are over planning and overthinking, you will keep making discoveries all the way through the process. It will never stop. And that's good. The point is that that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you did it wrong. That means you are doing it right. And when I say discoveries, I mean, no matter how big they might be, in this case, I'm really rethinking the arc of one of the three main characters. No matter how big that is, no matter how much it's going to require me to change or rethink, it doesn't feel like I'm throwing something away. It feels like I am making it better, even though I am actually throwing away certain things. The important thing is that it doesn't feel like I am starting over, even if I am, as I have in many cases, rewritten substantial amounts. It still feels like, this is getting to the thing that I wanted to do. I just didn't understand how to do it until now. I'll get to that part in a second. One of the things that I want to talk about here is what I saw. This book is divided into four main sections, four books within the book. They're called notebooks because they're supposed to be handwritten notebooks of this person's memoir. And there's little interchapters between the four, but the four sections are the bulk of the story. And the first two, it works. The story, there was a ton of, like, scene by scene, there was a huge amount I had not yet done, but it was telling the right story. It was telling a story that I liked and that I understood and that I said, oh yeah, that's the story I wanted to tell. The third and fourth parts, the story got all wobbly. It wasn't feeling right. It felt like it was groping towards something, but not getting it. And the reason was because one of the three main characters, I realized his life story within this three-person story was not fully thought through, was not really made into a good story. The thing is, I have three main characters: the narrator, and then the woman he's in love with, and the man that she's in love with, who is the main character's best friend. So it's a love triangle. I've gotten the main character's story. Everything about it, it's like, yes, he's doing this, and then he gets knocked off to this way, and that's working. In order to get that story right, I had to twist and turn the other people's stories. And especially the best friend, Charlie, the painter, his story was simply changing for the convenience of the main story. He wasn't changing because of his needs. He was changing because of what the other story needed. So I had to stop and I had to think, what is Charlie's story? I had already gone through several times and dealt with the main character and the woman he loves, but I hadn't dealt with the third part of the triangle. And so I had to say, like, why is Charlie, that's this character, why is his story not making sense? Even though each part of it was good. Like, I was like, oh, I like that idea. I like that he does that. But it didn't make sense, like why he would do that, considering where he was coming from. And I had to look at it for a while, and I realized one of the main problems was his story is not a Hollywood story. It is not a story, it doesn't follow my rules, okay? My famous the six questions you have to ask. Let me see if I can find that here. Yeah, this video, the 6 essential questions about how to construct a story and understand it, which is based in screenwriting, and especially screenwriting for Hollywood. it doesn't fit this story. It's just not. This is what I'm having to deal with here, is having to learn to break my own rules, because it's not a Hollywood script. It's a novel. It's a different thing. Novels have different rules. They have different operating areas. Charlie's story, actually, I realized, kind of goes in 4 phases, 4 stages of his life, which is really convenient because there's 4 books, and the 4 stages of Charlie's life kind of correspond to the 4 books. But the problem is, the story of Charlie is that he is a very, very gifted painter. He's a painter whose father was a famous portrait painter at the turn of the century, or in the 1920s, very classic, standard, academic. And Charlie is immensely gifted, but he doesn't like old-fashioned art. He loves modern art. He loves abstract art. However, by the time he is beginning to be a painter in the 1920s and 30s, modern art is actually kind of old. Modern art was formed in the 1905 to 1910-13 area. So it's actually old news by the time he gets it, and it's also not his art, because he's from America. Modern art was, modern European art was born in especially in Paris, especially around the circle around Picasso. And every modern artist in the 30s and 40s were wrestling with the fact that it seemed like modern art had kind of stopped. It was running out. It seemed like it had been discovered and it was old now. And so Charlie's main story is about how he's obsessed with finding a new phase of modern art, a new American phase, he wants to be the next Picasso, the next American Picasso. But not by doing Picasso's thing, by just doing what Picasso did, which is to break through to new ground. So that's what Charlie is obsessed with in the first part of the story. And he's obsessed to the point that even when he meets, he's like this, what they call a loft rat. He's this artist living in an industrial loft, barely scraping by. And he meets this rich heiress, this rich girl who's very socially minded, very political. And she could solve all his problems. They're in love with each other. And she's like, let me give you money to paint. And he's like, I can't. I have to just focus on this. I have to make my discoveries. And then I don't want to be your pet project. So he's in this turmoil of not being able to do his work in the first section. In the second section, and what happens is Charlie finds a way to get into to begin to do discovery of this new art that he can't quite figure out yet, and in doing so, he's kind of messing up his life. At the end of the first part, for various reasons, Billy, his girlfriend, leaves. She can't take it anymore. She leaves the country, actually. And Charlie is left alone with nothing but this devotion to this idea of this kind of art. And so the second part is about how, having been this messy wannabe, this like, I have a dream of a new kind of art guy, he's like, I actually have to shut out everything and go off on my own and figure this out. And he does. That's the second section, is weirdly, he does it. He breaks through. He actually invents what will be abstract expressionism. But he does it 10, 15 years before. But he does it privately in his little studio. He doesn't tell anyone. And in this moment, he is ecstatic. He is overjoyed. He is spending months just devoted to this breakthrough in painting. However, in being this saintly visionary, he's also neglecting he's literally starving to death. He is completely laser focused on this thing. And so when his friend and his girlfriend get back together and try and help him in the third part, they try to help him just get some money to eat and to have new painting supplies, that unexpectedly destabilizes him. It throws him off his track. It brings in the concerns of the outside world, of the art market, a lot of things which he had shut out, and it throws him off, and he stops working. So in the third section, he's sort of like been going so high and so fast that he kind of burns out and crashes. And in the fourth part, he's in a despair. And in that despair, he ends up getting closer to his girlfriend, but further from his art. And in the final part of the story, he's actually wounded in the war in such a way that he can never paint again. He's blinded. And the thing is that this story is, in Hollywood terms, in easy storytelling terms, it's unacceptable. This is a story about, it's sort of a story that goes like this. And to me, it's a very deeply powerful and resonant story about someone who achieves greatness privately, but never becomes known or great. No one ever knows he did this thing. And he never gets back to it. But at the same time, he has, in doing that, first of all, he has accomplished a remarkable thing, but he also, at the moment of his decline, he recognizes that the cost of what he accomplished was that he was unable to live his life. He was separated from his love and his life and the things of human life. And the question of the second half is that okay? And he does come to a form of acceptance of it. So that's his story. His story is about, it's the worst movie ever made in many ways. But I think it's a good story, and I think it's a good novel. And also, it's not the main story of the novel. So the point about this is that I realized it's the right story. I had kind of been afraid to accept that this story had this shape and was saying these things, because part of what it is saying, if you really look at it is possible that in order to achieve some greatness, you may sacrifice some life, some ordinary human goodness. And is that worth it? So these are the first thing I had to do was recognize that the shape was what it was. It was the right shape. It felt right. When I looked at it, I said, oh, that's what this story is. It's these three sections. It's this rise and fall. But in the rise and fall, there is also a getting of wisdom and a recognition of the different types of success, of accomplishment. So that's right. I knew that was right. I just had to get over the part of my brain that was saying this doesn't follow the rules. So the first thing I had to do was just say, I have to own that. I have to accept that. I have to say, this is what my instinct is saying is right, even though it's going against my knowledge. So once again, you don't really know what your work is about or how it operates or what it is until you write it and read it. There were things about it they were there. It was already in the story. I just didn't accept it because I had in my mind this pattern, this formula that it was supposed to fit. So the first element of this reading and discovery was recognizing literally a technical problem, which was my story was a shape that I wasn't accepting, and say, oh, I see what the story is. There's certainly little technical issues about the progress he makes, but that life story is a deep story that I wanted to tell. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple of questions here. I just want to point out, do you think that Kubrick's screenplays are overthought? And oh, you're finished your outline and that you're writing the novel. Good, that's excellent. Anyway, the point is I'm not going to answer questions until I'm done talking through this stuff. Thank you, Burgundy. Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad movie. It may be my Europeanness. I didn't realize you were European, but it makes sense. Yes, no, it's a great art film. It's just not. It's not Hollywood. Exactly right. But I drilled myself in Hollywood rules for 25 years, and I had to recognize that I had created a habit of thinking, which my artistic taste didn't accept. My artistic taste was like, no, this is a good story, but a part of my brain was fighting it, and when you recognize that, you can get past it. Um, Michael says, I feel for the character. Me too. That's why I wrote it. That's why I am committing to it. But that brings up the other big thing that I had to face when I reread this rough manuscript, which is it's very personal to me. Um, and so that's the next thing I have to talk about, which is Charlie's story is I deliberately tried to deal with things that I was wrestling with personally in my life, which is partly the question of, is it true that in order to be great at your art, you must sacrifice some normal life, some healthy life? Is that true or is that not true? And in this story, I was telling a story which said yes, that in fact, in a way, Charlie could only be great because he had cut himself off from normal life and devoted himself so exclusively to his art that he broke through to a new place, but the cost was his life, his everyday living life. And the question that I had to deal with was, in telling this story, I was afraid of making a judgment, partly a judgment on myself and partly a judgment on, because part of me was thinking, if I had been more like Charlie, if I had not tried to also have a healthy life, would I have been better? Would I have accomplished more? But further, the other thing about Charlie that I haven't gotten into is Charlie tries to do too much. Not only, like, he doesn't just discover Jackson Pollock's style. He discovers Pollock's and Rothko's and Klein's and all of the, like, the whole point about this little weird story I tell you about Charlie is that he discovers all of abstract expressionism because he's trying different things, but he doesn't settle on any one and say, this is my style. And in not choosing, in trying to do everything, he doesn't finish it and do anything. And I personally, when I look back on the things I have done, I have always been doing practical things. I'm going to get this script done, but I have this other idea which is much more ambitious. But I'm going to put that aside because it's much harder to sell and because it's much harder to do. Or I start a project and it's so ambitious that I don't know how to do it. And I stop. And when I look back at my career and my accomplishments, I cannot help but recognize that I have not done what Charlie did, but I have suffered from not doing necessarily what I was truest to my soul, because A, it was too hard, and B, it was impossible to do that and have a commercial career. So the question is, would I have been better off following my artistic vision, even though it was being rejected, and hoping that it could get accepted? But it won't. Something can't be accepted if you don't finish it, if you don't show it, if you don't stand by it. And so I had to think about, by telling this story, I am treading in areas that are personal to me, that make me vulnerable to feeling like I have to make a statement about them that I wasn't sure I could or wanted to make. And what I had to reckon with upon this reading was that it's not going to be good if I don't deal with those, if I don't tell this story, even though it's sad. And of course, there is a self-aggrandizing part of me saying, oh, if I had only done this, I would have been Picasso. I would have been a genius that everyone would have bowed down before. And, there's a part of me that's uncomfortable even exploring that idea. Even if if I didn't tell you guys here, if I didn't put it on the record that these are personal issues I am wrestling with, no one would have known. And therefore, I had nothing to fear of somebody saying, geez, Glenn, how embarrassing that you thought so highly of yourself. But the main thing is, it's a very ambiguous, ambivalent feeling of, did I accomplish the best I could considering, or did I fail in following the rules? And one of the main things I'm wrestling with now is the very, very strong possibility that what I wanted to do, what I envisioned, was impossible, that it was too big. Just like with Charlie. Like, if Charlie had actually shown the people his paintings of all those different styles, would the world have even been able to accept it? Because Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning partly became famous because they were brandable as a distinctive style. But what if one of them had done two styles? Would they have been sellable? It's even possible that they wouldn't. I tend to always want an encyclopedic kind of art. Like the idea of an art that builds an entire world or covers every topic, that's both comedy and tragedy, and it's Western and it's mystical, all those things. My ideal art would be all of them in one thing. But it's possible that that's not doable, or even if it is doable, it would be like Finnegan's Wake, like James Joyce, who I admire but honestly can't read. And so I'm all of this is stuff I'm reckoning with, and I had to recognize that impulse to deal with a personal belief or feeling, even though I had not resolved it, was in fact what made this worth doing. Even though, once again, I'm not going to be following the rules. I'm not going to be teaching a lesson that everyone can take and have an easy, good, happy time with it. It's very, very ambiguous. And that is scary to me. But what I realized is all of the work that I look back on in my career, because I've managed to do a lot. And in that work, the ones where I most felt scared, where I most felt this feeling of vulnerability, or that I couldn't be sure that it would be understood or accepted, that was always the best work. I remember distinctly, I think probably the thing I feel most proud of in some ways is Disfigured, this little indie movie that I produced myself. So I paid for it myself so that there was simply no one to interfere with the taking of risks. And I remember specifically at each stage, even the title, I remember when I came up with the title Disfigured in this story about women and weight, which the question was even like, how dare I write about that? But I remember thinking of the title Disfigured because of the ambivalence of people's body image, and thinking, oh, you can't do that. And then I thought, that's why it's right. That's the fact that I thought, I am scared of this artistic choice. Not scared that it's breaking the rules, scared that it's going to upset or offend, scared that it's not easy. That turned out to be the best reason to do it. And I want to talk about that, and this is personal. If it feels scary personally to me to touch on a subject, that may be the best reason to do it. It may not. Everyone is different. Everyone's life is different. I don't want to say, oh, if you want to do something trashing your family or, whatever, you should just do it because that's the best stuff. Maybe not. You have to decide for yourself the possible cost of these things, the possible embarrassment or outrage I could have, and in some ways did, stir up by writing about women and weight and body image when I am not a woman was risky. But it turned out to be very, very deeply satisfying when I pushed towards the ambiguity. I pushed towards not making an easy Hollywood statement. That's it. And what I would say is, when you are breaking the rules and writing vulnerably, I had to look up to make sure vulnerably was actually a word, but it is. That asks you to think about why. Why do you think that? Why are you feeling like you should do it? Why is it upsetting to others? Why? It's very, very, very important to not just, it isn't enough to just follow your feelings and your instincts. It is useful to also ask, why? What am I trying to do with this? What does it feel like? And then to explore where that takes you. For instance, with Charlie, where it's taking me is to accept the ambivalence, the balanced feelings of possibly this is what greatness is and possibly this is bad. And I think for me, and this is just for me, everyone is different. I'm not saying you should do it, but for me, the great work comes from tuning into your own feelings and instincts, your style, your plot story, whatever. And then also thinking about why, not just going blindly on instinct. It's very easy to say, ooh, this is scary because people will be upset, so I'll just do it. And you're just doing it just to, frankly, to provoke a reaction. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about internally scary. I'm talking about saying, this is something that is, for some reason, strong to me, meaningful to me. And I am going to pursue this. One of the biggest questions when I talk about these issues about being an artist, who cares? Like, is this genuinely something worth telling a story of? Especially because I'm not like doing a how-to, and I'm not giving advice. I'm just saying, this is a story. This is a story that provokes thoughts and meanings. So that's what all of this came from reading a really messy draft. This draft has certain sections where it's just random paragraphs. Like there's some somewhere just like, this is a thought, and then this paragraph is another thought, and this paragraph is another thought. And I know they're all going to get in here somehow, but I'm just piling them up and saying, oh, this guy went to a party, thought. I don't know how that shape of that scene works yet. I got to work on that. But the existence of the party and the existence of those thoughts was in the right place. And in following that, I said, oh, I was not yet aware that Charlie's story was this rise and fall. I was not aware that my main character's Tom's story is what they call a sentimental education, a story of what sometimes they call a Bildungsroman, which is a German German phrase for a novel about the building of a life. And that's actually what this is. I didn't realize that. I thought, oh, it's a story. I just knew it was a story of this love affair, this love triangle, and that's part of it. But actually what's happening is during the love affair, Tom, the main character, is going through these phases of learning about who he is, because he's this wandering, drifting orphan, and where he fits into this world and what this world is. So anyway, that's the stuff that came to me because I read through my own rough draft. And I read it as a reader. I refused to like, if I had a little note like, oh God, that scene is backwards, I would just jot it somewhere. But I left the manuscript untouched and forced myself to just read it as a reader, as an audience. Even though that obviously requires some mental construction to cover up the gaps and the planks and the problems. But that was my lesson for the day. So now I will quickly go through your comments and questions. And let's see. So Michael said, when I read my scene several times, it's more like an edit. Yes, that's the problem. What I'm saying is that every once in a while, you have to find some way to step out of it and not read it like an edit, but read it like a reader and see where you're stumbling or what you're getting from it. Because very often you'll get things like, oh, this is funnier than I thought. Or, oh, this is darker than I thought. And you have to, at a certain point, let the thing tell you about itself. That's my point. Haskell says, I find reading my work not that hard as such. But when I read, I know a rhythm, intonations, background knowledge, and I imply things a naive reader wouldn't know. Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying, is that when I read it, I have to find some way to throw myself out of it. This time it was doing a PDF. I have a feeling the next time I'm going to have to change the font. I know that sounds weird, but when I export the PDF, I'm going to have to change the font to a different font so that I can confront it with some of those preconceptions knocked off. I don't know. For me, that's what does it. I don't know. Different people have different ways that their brain will work, but I have discovered that in some way printing or PDFing and in some way formatting or changing it helps me to look at it fresh. Time is the other thing that does that, but who wants to put something away for a year? So hi Butte. Michael asks, do you think Kubrick screenplays are overthought? I don't. I think that they're thought just right, but they are not easy. but my personal opinion. No. Lake Filter says he's just finished his outline and started to write his novel. Yay! Good. Congratulations. Not too happy about the outline, but I don't have enough experience to make it better yet. That is the perfect attitude. That is the greatest lesson you can have. Let me see if I can find this famous quote. Well, it's not famous. It's famous to me, from Walter Mosley. Walter Mosley said, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. It's done when you know that everything you need to fix, you can't fix yet. Walter Mosley, great novelist, wrote that. Lake Filter, that's where you are. You hit the outline, you're like, I know it's not perfect, but I don't know how to fix it yet, so I'm just going to keep moving ahead. That's right, because in doing what you do next, you'll learn, you'll discover, you'll figure it out. Okay. The story kind of reminds me of Gregor Mendel. You mean the scientist? Wasn't he the geneticist? Anyway, let me know. So that's profound, isn't it? Seeing the brain battle between trained habit and real free artistry. Yes, that is exactly the problem, is that you do need that craft and you do have your mental habits. So the cost of greatness and purposeful passion, so spot on. Thank you. A powerful polymath, multifaceted story. That is what I am hoping. I appreciate the support. Yeah, the other thing for me, this is just me. I know, like the reason I'm saying this is because when I know that something, when I say it's scary, it's because there's a part of me that's like, I like that. That's what I consider good. Just like when you're watching or reading something that you think is good, you're like, bing, something goes off in your brain of like, wow, that's good. And in my own work, I hit those points. I'm like, oh, that's a good story. And then you have to remember, oh, I wrote that story and I need to craft towards that good thing. So I don't have the problem as much of like, oh, I'm bad. I like what I do. It just takes me a while to see what it is. I'm going to do a little side thing. In writing this, I'm trying to read more novels, and I'm also trying to listen to or read more interviews with novelists. And I listen to the New York Public Library has a podcast, NYPL podcast, in which they record their live conversation, like interview conversations. This was a conversation for the New York Public Library between Richard Price, who's a novelist I like a lot, and Michael Chabon, or Chaban. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I believe it's Chaban. And they were talking together for an hour on this podcast. They are both marvelous writers. And they were both talking about how much they hate plot. That not only do they hate doing plot, but they hate reading it. Like when they read something and it's got too much plot, it makes them mad. And I believe the reason is because they're looking for authentic, unwell-crafted work that's capturing real life. And I respect that, but I love plot. I absolutely adore plotting. I love plotted stuff, and I love doing it. So I was like, wow, these two guys who I really respect, and both of them, they don't outline like I do. They don't plot like I do. They hate what I like. But what I realized was, as they described their writing process, they were talking about this very, very concept, which is you figure out what the work is as you go along. Now, they can sustain a lot more patience for that than I can. I need to plot it. I like plot, but also I need to plot it so that I know what I'm doing, because otherwise I just wander and I get lost and I get frozen with fear. So I can't imagine doing what they're doing, because what they're doing, I think, is the same thing I'm talking about, but at a much more demanding level, which is they're saying, I'm going to start with some vague ideas or a notion or some characters, and I'm going to work through it as I go, and I'm going to write as I figure it out. I can't do that. But what I can do, what I tried to do, was recognize from their description of their process the value of not sticking to your plan so hard that you give up your art, that you give up your greatness, that you give up those inspired, original, offbeat things because you've sticking to your plan. I believe I need to make a plan, but I also need to know when to change the plan or give up the plan and keep moving. At a certain point, you stop working from the plan and you start working from the book, from the text itself. And that's the point I'm at. And that's why I wanted to share this. Now I'll get back to your comments. Okay. Memoirs stuff right there. Not sure what that meant because I was not looking while I was talking. So I don't know what that was referring to. Do you think you would have written these unsellable stories were you not working in Hollywood? Was your art restricted by the industry's standards? That's a really good question, Burgundy. I think that there's two things going on. One is absolutely there were and are very strict demands made by popular entertainment, or even to a certain extent from literary work. Like literary work has its own rules. But especially things that are going to sell, going to make money, going to become part of the big business of entertainment, they tend to be somewhat formulaic. They have demands. Like you can't have an unhappy ending currently in many, many Hollywood movies. The three-act structure, the clarity of a single character who learns or accomplishes something. Those are unwritten, although now more and more spoken, rules of the form of entertainment I was trying to break into. Now, what's interesting about your question is you say, when you were working in Hollywood, the truth is I was teaching myself how to write in order to get into Hollywood. So I was working from a more loose artistic landscape, but I wanted to make money. I was an office temp for 12 years or a scrounging writer for 12 years before I learned the rules enough to put my talent into an acceptable form for the industry. That arc of learning the acceptable form for the industry was not something they actively told me to do. They simply didn't accept my work until I did it, if that makes sense. So my art was restricted by the industry standards. Now, the other thing that I had to learn was how to make good art within the narrow structure of a particular form, which is likewise the task if you're writing a sonnet or a haiku or a popular song or whatever. Any art form has its restrictions. I was coming from as I said, an encyclopedic place in which I love theater and I love movies and I love novels and I love paintings. And I wanted to do all these things. And I didn't understand that I had to give up some of my many vibes to fit into the form that was acceptable to the business. So was my art restricted by the industry standards? Yes, but also working within those restrictions is in itself a legitimate art form. So therefore, working within a Hollywood structure, you can still do great art. Billy Wilder managed it. Hitchcock managed it sometimes. All sorts of people have managed to make great films in the structure. And what's more, there's no reason, like if for some reason haiku or sonnets suddenly became the biggest industry, I guarantee you there'd be people struggling, like, how can I get my art into haiku form? So the answer is, they weren't explicitly telling me do that. They were simply rejecting me until I fit, if that helps. So I have to take responsibility for my decision to fit that box because I wanted the money. And not just the money, I wanted the recognition. I wanted to play in that game. I wanted to work with those people and be recognized and promoted the way that they were. I could have had a different goal. There are many people who are like, ooh, I don't want to be part of that game. And that's cool. I was driven to do it personally. So I limited myself. And I learned those limits so well that now I'm having to undo some of that in my golden years, in my retirement, in my final freedom. Hi, Jordan. I'm so glad you agree. Thank you. Okay. Doreen says, I sent a few chapters to a friend and she called me and read them to me. It was so helpful. Yes. Yeah. No, there are people who, like, if you can get someone to read it for you, the problem is for me, because it's a novel, I needed it on the page. Having someone read it to me would be weird because I don't do audiobooks. I mean, I don't listen to them that much. Anyway. Arturus says, what are unwritten rules about chapters' length? How would it look and feel for the reader if some chapters are twice as long? For example, in number of words, 700 to 1500 to 3000 words. The answer is there are unwritten rules. The basic rule is shorter is better in terms of readability, in terms of popularity. Even if you have a chapter that's like the actual like numbered chapters are broken up and there's only 4 of them, like in my book, there's 4 essential chapters. Each one is broken into 30 or 40 smaller sections. So those sections are smaller. I have found books do better and are more readable and more acceptable when they're broken into small chunks. Is that bad? Is that artistically bad? I'll tell you, I'm reading a book right now by E.L. Doctorow called Homer and Langley. I believe I am still in the first chapter. I think there's only 3 chapters. It's like, now there are sections, like there'll be like a double space between a section and another section. It's not a chapter, but we now in modern life, we like breaks. We like a place to stop. If you look, actually, even if you look at Dostoevsky or Dickens or Zola, they'll break things into reasonably shaped chapters. Their chapters tend to be a little longer than ours would. But there's no rule, but the instinct now is try to break things into smaller pieces. That's just the way that we read now in our distracted age. Back in the 19th century, when people were still reading by flames, by lamps, and they had no TV or radio, so they would sit and read for an hour. Yeah, chapters were longer. Okay. Hasco says, I understand your struggle more than I'd like to admit. I can't wait to read your book. Thank you. I really appreciate that. This is the thing, just like with Disfigured, when I was writing about something that was absolutely not my experience, but the sense of dissociation from your body, I felt, even though I'm not a woman, and even though it's about an obese woman and an anorexic woman, I'm not either one. But the sense of body issues or alienation from our physical self just felt real to me. So I was like, I can talk about that even though I'm not them. And the other, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. The other issue in that story was addiction, the sense of compulsion or addiction. And I understood that feeling too, the compulsive quality, the extremeness, the grip of it. All of us have personal things that they ring a bell. And so in that case, I was like, this is ringing a bell. Most things I write about, if I'm choosing them personally, there's something in there ringing a bell. The way I manage to do jobs is to find the bell in them. But yes, to me, it's got to be personal. It's got to be something I feel. Okay. Donna says, Glenn, you are firing my neurons today. You've helped me see editing as the artistry editors see it as, not as annoying and awful, but rather as a whole new art form to operate within. Yay, that's great. Yes, you can call it editing. You can call it rewriting. You can just call it writing, because to me, it's all part of the writing process, is stopping and questioning. That's writing. That's not editing. That's not rewriting. It is all those things. But to me, it's all writing. And that might help to remember that that's actually part of the job. Making personal discoveries can make the story esoteric. Yes. I mean, there are people who would say something about painters is already esoteric. Something about old painters is extremely esoteric. Something about the personal struggles of old painters, when painters' problems or artists' problems, who cares? All true. Yet, I felt like I wanted to say it. So there you go. The Bearded Screenwriter says, just wanted to drop in and say hello, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you and everyone else here. Thank you, Bearded Screenwriter. I say the same, just briefly. I'm going to put out a little video next week just to alert you, but I'm taking the 2 holiday weeks off. It happens that Christmas and New Year's are on Wednesdays, which is when I'm going to do it, but I just want the weeks off. So merry and happy to you too. Lake Filter says, my most vulnerable work to date is a very adult story about a conservative woman with a traumatic past who's very talented in bed. And it was intended for female readers. So yeah, too scary. Yes, whatever rings your bells, take that seriously. Take it seriously, and then you're going to have to think about how to do what you want to do. I have never had a challenge that I hadn't had to stop and intellectually work on the craft of that challenge, but it's always driven by the scary personal. And then you use the craft to accomplish the artistic goal. Rich Miglio says, dysmorphia. Yes, body dysmorphia. That is very much what Disfigured was wrestling with. So there. Should you see the whole story before starting a first draft, Rich asks. I got to say, I don't know how not to do that, but I was just talking about Richard Price and Michael Chabon, who both have said, and Stephen King and Neil Simon, lots of writers have said they have a rough idea of the story, but they honestly do not plan it out. They figure it out as they are going along. Obviously, they then have to go back and tinker with it, sometimes substantially. But I personally, yes, I need to plan out every scene. Many great writers don't. It's a question of whether you have the personal tolerance for the uncertainty. I feel like the uncertainty of the words is big enough that I want to be certain that I've wrestled with the story and got it into a shape that feels like a good story before I start to wrestle with the other part, which is how do you do that? Like words. John Irving used to say when he was writing the words, he didn't want to worry about what he was writing about. He wanted to just worry about the words then. That's sort of where I come down. Although once I get into that, I then have to stop and ask questions about the bigger thing. Burgundy says to Arturus, it depends on the rhythm of your story. She is talking about how long should chapters be. If there's a heavy world building, for example, it could be better to slow down and describe the environments more. Yes, exactly. There are, especially in fiction, there are no rules. It's possible to do a 30-page chapter with no paragraph breaks. You have to recognize that that's very demanding on a reader. They don't get to catch their breath. They don't get to stop. Even a paragraph break gives you a place to stop. And especially in our lives now when we're often interrupted while reading or only have a little bit of time for reading, it's kind of nice to give people those little off-ramps, I think. But you should do what the vision of your story requires. Burgundy points out that that's often why fantasy books generally have longer chapters. Yes, that's also true, is that if you're trying to sort of force the reader to engage, you don't want to give them an off-ramp. You want to get their head in the place. Either one is possible. Adam Lum says, Merry Christmas, always inspiring. See you in the new year. You too, Adam Lum. And to Mark Burton, nice to see you, all of you. And actually, I think that's a good place to stop. Gone for an hour, spilled my guts. More spilling in the new year, lots to come. I hope you all have a safe and happy and healthy in whatever way that works for you for your midwinter holiday season. In the meantime, I am just going to say I'll see you on the other side, second week of January, and I will post a little video about that. Thank you, Lake Filter, for your holiday wishes, and to you, Burgundy, all of you. I love talking to you. It's great to see you. Thank you, Rich, for your happy holidays. And with that, I say, all of you, please go write something.